Hello, welcome back to my series of lessons on Unit 2, which is based on pre-production and planning. In the previous lesson, we looked at the personnel that you need to consider when planning a production. We looked at financial constraints and we looked at the different purposes of media products. Today, we're going to look at regulation and ethical issues that may arise in the pre-production stage. So the do now is here. You can just pause it and answer these questions and then come back to the video. This is testing you on the previous video, so make sure you've seen that before you watch this one. What are 3 examples of revenue streams? What are 3 examples of financial constraints? And what legal factors need to be considered in the pre-production stage? That is a predictive question because we're going to answer that in today's lesson. Relevant facilities, locations, and resources required for a project include studio, props, sets, microphones, computers, cameras, lighting, and editing software. So we're going to look at the legal issues now. In Unit 1, we looked, I haven't uploaded those videos yet, but in Unit 1, you consider different regulatory bodies for different types of media and their different roles. That's still relevant, but we're going to look at specific laws as well that you need to consider and legal aspects. As well as those regulatory bodies that we're just going to quickly recap in a minute, overseeing various aspects of the digital media sector, there's a wide range of legislation that also impacts the production of a digital media product. During the planning phase of the production, these impacts must be considered and acted upon. Here are some examples of legislation that could affect the production process. So just after we recap the regulatory bodies, that's when we'll discuss the legislation. So very quickly, IPSO regulates newspapers and magazines, Ofcom regulates TV and radio, the ASA regulate advertising, the BBFC regulate film, and the Games Rating Authority regulate video games in the UK with the age rating handled by PEGI. So the first bit of legislation you need to consider is the Freedom of Information Act. So the public has the right to access information that's held by public sector organisations. During the research stage of any media product, such as in the news industry, access to this data can be requested from a variety of public sector organisations using the Freedom of Information Act. Intellectual property. If you have worked to produce a piece of work such as an image, script, article, or graphic, then it is your intellectual property. If someone wants to use it, they require your permission. If you produce the work while working for an organisation, you do not own the intellectual property of that item. The organisation does. So here are some things that can be considered intellectual property or IP. So if you came up with a design, a patent for like an invention, authorship, so that could be articles, it could be books, scripts. If you came up with an invention, if you came up with a law, if you've copyrighted something, etc., etc., branding. So the Data Protection Act. If you collect data about individuals during the creation of a media product, then the Data Protection Act must be followed or you could face a lawsuit. Personal data could be collected through journalistic investigation or in a social media campaign. For example, if you're doing a survey or something like that, or if someone's signing up to your website or things like that, or your mailing list, etc. The Copyright Design and Patents Act 1988. If you created a piece of music, sound recordings, images, films, broadcast, photographs, or written work, then you have the rights to control how it's used by other people. Rights of ownership vary in length depending on the product type. Libel and slander. These are similar, but there's one key difference between the two terms. So libel is you could face a lawsuit if the media product is published containing information about someone that's untrue and damaging to their reputation, whether it's in written form, through imagery or radio broadcast, while slander carries the same legal implications as libel, but involves making a false statement through speaking about someone. So now here's a quick test. What legal issue is relevant to these scenarios? So, for example, Disney and Universal suing Midjourney over AI images featuring their characters, or being able to generate AI images with their characters, or as well as an artist called Marvin Gaye. His estate or his family sued Robin Thicke and Pharrell Williams because of their song Blurred Lines. They felt like it was too similar to Marvin Gaye's song, so they sued and they won. So which legislation is this related to? Okay, so the Intellectual Property Act. Here's a case called Rain vs. J.D. Wetherspoon. Wetherspoons is a pub, so the case concerned a former employee of J.D. Wetherspoon whose emergency contact details were disclosed to her abusive ex-partner following a deceptive phone call, giving rise to claims for misuse of private information, breach of confidence, and breach of data protection law. Well, I've just given you the answer there. During her employment, the claimant provided her mother's mobile number as an emergency contact. The number was stored in her personnel file, which was marked strictly private and confidential, and kept in a locked filing cabinet. In 2018, the claimant informed her employer on 3 separate occasions that she was experiencing serious abuse and harassment from her partner and feared further contact. After her employment ended, the ex-partner telephoned the pub where she had worked, impersonating a police officer and claiming an urgent need to contact her. Despite having received training on pre-texting, a manager authorized staff to disclose the emergency contact number orally. The ex-partner subsequently used the number to further harass the claimant. Yep, so the Data Protection Act. The company was in the wrong because they shouldn't have been sharing her personal information so easily. There were certain steps that they should have gone through to make sure that the person was authorized that they gave it to. Okay, here's another scenario. An Australian man has launched a defamation case against one of the nation's biggest news channels after it wrongly identified him as an alleged child abductor. In a missing child case that gripped the nation, Cleo Smith, age 4, was rescued from a stranger's home on the 3rd of November. Police had charged Terence Kelly with her abduction, but hours after his arrest, Seven, which I believe is the news channel, wrongly published photos of Terence Flowers, another Aboriginal man. His lawyers said Seven had significantly injured his character and reputation by misrepresenting him as the main suspect. So what legislation does this relate to? Libel. It's libel because they misrepresented him. So they falsely claimed he was a child abductor when it was actually someone else. And it was broadcast. It wasn't just a written statement. It was broadcast on national television. So therefore it's libel rather than slander. So now we're going to look at the impacts of ethical issues. We just looked at some legislation, and before that we recapped on the different regulatory bodies and the types of media that they regulate, which I didn't go into detail on because you should have gone over that in Unit 1. When planning a media product, ethical issues must be considered so that whatever product is being developed does not cause offense or disturb those who use it. Ethical issues range from avoiding offensive material to presenting particular groups in stereotypical ways. Failure to follow professional standards and not considering the ethical issues raised can have major implications for the producer of a media product. These can range from legal action being taken to the product being banned from sale. These in turn can have a massive long-term effect, such as damaging the reputation and loss of business. So we're going to look at a case study now. Apple suppliers and labor practices. So this is about the company Apple. With its highly coveted line of consumer electronics, Apple has built a cult following among loyal customers. During the 2014 holiday season, 74.5 million iPhones were sold. Demand like this meant Apple was in line to make over $52 billion in profits in 2015, the largest annual profit ever generated from a company's operations. Despite its consistent financial performance year over year, Apple's robust profit margin hides a more complicated set of business ethics. Similar to many products sold in the US, Apple does not manufacture most of its goods domestically, which means within the US. Most of the component sourcing and factory production is done overseas in conditions that critics have argued are dangerous to workers and harmful to the environment. For example, tin is a major component in Apple's products, and much of it is sourced in Indonesia. Although there are mines that source tin ethically, there are also many that do not. One study found workers, many of them children, working in unsafe conditions, digging tin out by hand in mines prone to landslides that could bury workers alive. About 70% of the tin used in electronic devices such as smartphones and tablets comes from these more dangerous small-scale mines. An investigation by the BBC revealed how perilous these working conditions can be. In interviews with miners, a 12-year-old working at the bottom of a 70-foot cliff of sand said, "I worry about landslides, the earth slipping from up there to the bottom. It could happen." Apple defends its practices by saying it only has so much control over monitoring and regulating its component sources. The company justifies its sourcing practices by saying that it is a complex process with tens of thousands of miners selling tin, many of them through middlemen. In a statement to the BBC, Apple said the simplest course of action would be for Apple to unilaterally refuse any tin from Indonesian mines. That would be easy for us to do and would certainly shield us from criticism. But that would also be the lazy and cowardly path, since it would do nothing to improve the situation. We have chosen to stay engaged and attempt to drive changes on the ground. In an effort for greater transparency, Apple has released annual reports detailing their work with suppliers and labour practices, while more recent investigations have shown some improvements to suppliers' working conditions. Apple continues to face criticism as consumer demand for iPhones and other products continue to grow. So the reason why I showed you that article is to show that Apple could have potentially lost a lot of business and their reputation could have declined drastically if more and more people found out about the terrible conditions that a lot of the components of their phones were being produced in, as well as it being very dangerous. So they took it upon themselves to investigate the problem and to try and resolve it, and they vowed to be more transparent with their progress and the changes that were being made. So that's a sort of how they dealt with an ethical issue for their reputation. So here are some questions that you can think about in your own time, or you can try and answer them. And that wraps up today's lesson. So to summarize, today we looked at legal and ethical issues. So we recapped on the regulatory bodies in the media industries. We looked at some legislation such as the Data Protection Act and copyright issues, and we also looked at ethical issues. We're going to expand on this in later lessons as well, so make sure you keep watching and you subscribe so you can get all the information on Unit 2.